Before we begin this podcast, please be advised that the following episode contains language that some listeners may find offensive and inappropriate. The opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not reflect the views of the podcast producers. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the second installment of Charles Higginbotham's story. When we last left off in this story, Charles felt certain that Kevin was a sexual predator who needed to be dealt with. Conspiring with Kenny, Charles set a plan in motion to take Kevin out of the picture. Now, Charles walks us through that fateful day in our conversation on Voices of a Killer.
So, what was the plan you told Kenny? Like, hey, I'm gonna shoot this guy, or what?
I told Kenny that I'm going to tell Kevin that a friend has got a Jeep that's broke down out in the woods, and that we need a big, strong guy to come out and help us get it out, and that Kevin's going to come with me. When I lure him down into the woods, where we know he will be unarmed and will be safe, and Kenny can wait with a gun and shoot him.
So you actually made it to where Kenny had to shoot him?
Yes.
So whenever you went to Kevin, the victim, you just went over to his place and said, hey, we need your help with this Jeep, and did he get in with you guys?
Kenny was I took Kenny out in the woods, and Kenny was already waiting.
Oh, Kenny was already, okay, your co-defendant was already waiting out the woods where you wanted to take the victim?
Right. But here's the thing. There's no Jeep story with Kevin. That's what I think you're missing.
Okay. Go ahead and explain it then.
Okay, the night before I told Kevin that I was ready to take some money from him, and I would do something with him, but no one could see us. So let's go out into the woods where I had a place. And went out in the woods with him the night before.
With Kenny?
No, with Kevin.
Oh.
Kenny wasn't there the night before. This was the night before we murdered him. Kevin
Okay.
and I went out in the woods alone.
Okay. Okay, now I'm following you.
My plan was, after we did what we did, that I would murder him then, myself. I couldn't find where I stashed the gun.
When did you find out you didn't know? Oh, so whenever you brought Kevin the first time, you couldn't find the gun?
Right. Kevin and I ended up going back home.
And whenever you couldn't find the gun, what was the reason you brought Kevin out there the first time when you couldn't find the gun?
Because he was going to give me money for sex.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's your story. I just thought that maybe you said it was the Jeep thing. You know what I mean?
No, that's what I had to tell Kenny, because I couldn't tell. That's why I told Kenny I was going to lure Kevin out in the woods to get a Jeep. And that's what I told. That's what the court believes, because I was ashamed to talk about having sex with a guy.
Okay. I got it. So you didn't kill him the first time, but you planned on it?
Right. I planned on doing it myself and failed at it.
Why did you really not be able to find the gun, or you just decided not to?
I don't know. I tell myself that I couldn't find the gun. I stepped away from Kevin at one point and looked around, but honestly, I don't know. I don't know if I even wanted to find the gun. I don't know. So
you took him back. Y'all went back to the house, and that day was over.
And that's why I went and begged Kenny the whole next day. He said, "Look, you've got to help me get this guy." And I told Kenny, "He's got a bunch of money. We can buy drugs. We can party. We can do this." Kenny was like, "What are you?" I mean, he thought I was an idiot. He would do anything for me.
With Kenny's help, Charles devised a plan to lure Kevin down to an isolated area in the woods. But this wasn't Charles's first attempt on Kevin's life. The night before the planned murder, Charles had tried and failed to kill Kevin on his own. Promising to exchange sex for money, Charles had taken Kevin to the designated murder spot the day before. However, when Charles couldn't find the gun he'd stashed away, the plan fell through and the two returned home without incident. A day later, Charles tried a second time, again luring Kevin with the promise of a sexual encounter. Too ashamed to reveal his sexual orientation to his closest friend, however, Charles told a different story to Kenny. As far as Kenny knew, Kevin thought he was coming down to help them out with a broken-down Jeep, a story Charles thought would be more palatable than the truth. As Kevin walked alongside Charles, stepping away from Stephanie's home, the trees got denser, cutting out patches of sunlight. Happy to be led somewhere private and away from prying eyes, Charles was unaware that he was being led, this time, to the place of his death.
And so now you dropped Kenny off in the woods at a certain location.
Yeah.
And you went Kevin again. Did you tell Kevin this was over sex to bring him back or over the Jeep?
Yeah, that's why Kevin's like, sure, I'll go back. And so we went out into the woods again, and when we walked by the area where Kenny was.
Well, hold a second. So y'all actually go back to the same area, you get out of the vehicle together?
Yes.
And is Kenny like hiding in like behind a tree or something?
Where we were, we kind of go like a few hundred yards off into the woods in an area not far from my house that I'd grown up next to, so I knew really well.
Right.
We had to walk kind of down a trail and down a little hill to a secluded place is the idea.
Yeah.
That's where Kevin thinks, we're going to the same place we were the night before. It's a place that Kenny had camped before.
Yeah.
Which is why I told Kenny that I'll tell Kevin we've got a broken Jeep here.
Right. So the Jeep story goes to Kenny and the sex story goes to Kevin.
Kevin, right.
And whenever you get out there, do you know, like, okay, we're approaching the area where Kenny actually is? Do you probably know that exact location? Did you let Kevin walk ahead of you or behind you or beside you?
I was quite a ways out in front of Kevin.
When you got to the location, you saw that Kenny was there and you just kind of waited and knew that he was right there?
Okay, I kind of panicked at first because Kenny wasn't in the location where I left him. And he didn't think there was enough cover in that area, so he moved behind some like taller weeds and grass and things that had grown up. And so he had actually moved a little bit.
You were afraid that Kevin would get there and try to make sexual advances with Kenny just off waiting?
Exact. That's why I was so far away from Kevin. I didn't want him to be right near me when Kenny saw us. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that is spot on.
Yeah. So you walk up, and how far away is Kevin when you finally notice Kenny, or was it the last minute?
I was by this time, I'm moving way faster than Kevin. I'm probably 30 or 40 feet in front of him when I hear the shuffling in the bushes back behind us, and that's when Kenny stood up and shot Kevin.
Did Kevin see him stand up and point the gun at him, or was he facing him, or what?
I don't think so.
Did you shoot him in his back?
I shot him, I believe, in the back of the head, and then he kind of collapsed. And
what did y'all do as soon as he collapsed? Did he move around, or was he completely out of it?
It looked like he might have been moving, or I'm not sure. He may have still been alive. Kenny thought that I was going to have a knife on me and that I was going to come up and help him. I knew I couldn't have any kind of weapon. That was a lie I told Kenny because, Kevin could see me. Kevin was in the car with me.
Yeah. So after y'all shoot him, how long do y'all stick around this body? How long till you finally leave?
Kenny had to shoot him a second time.
Because he was still moving, or just to make sure?
To make sure. We couldn't tell, or we were so panicked, we weren't sure if he was still moving. We don't know. I'm not positive. To this day, Kenny thinks he may have still been moving. He may have been alive.
So do y'all discuss this in prison?
Yeah, we have talked about it. We work together in prison here. We have been in prison for 31 years. We've talked about this a lot.
Really? So y'all go back to that day and start breaking it all down together?
Sometimes. It's not a thing that we go over frequently.
Sure.
More than anything, we go over the impact we've had on our family, on his family, on everyone involved.
Yeah. So after he shoots him the second time, did y'all just run off, or did y'all stick around and talk about it, or what?
Blood simple panic. We tried to pick him. We picked him up and moved him into a creek that was right there, so there wouldn't be any physical evidence, I guess. And then we didn't know what to do after that. That's when we panicked and left him there in the creek.
Whenever y'all left, where did y'all go together?
It was July 2nd on that Friday, and it was 4th of July weekend. We went and bought drugs, cocaine, and then drove down to the lake because we were supposed to go see my camp with my mom and her boyfriend at Palm Beach Lake and my sister.
So you went to your family as if it's just a regular, family get together, but yet you just killed somebody. What was that like walking in there facing your family after that?
Horrible, horrible. I mentioned I don't have a very good relationship with my adopted mom anyway, but it was horrible, strained. We barely talked. It was horrible.
Yeah. And where was Kenny at? Was he with you?
Yeah, he was with me. Like I said, he was like a brother anywhere I went.
Sure. Are y'all still like discussing what just happened, at your mom's?
We were kind of
numb.
Yeah, we were very numb from it. We were doing a lot of, at that time we went and bought a bunch of cocaine. We were drinking.
On July 2nd, 1993, Charles Higginbotham and Kenny Gilbert became 18-year-old killers. The second attempt on Kevin's life unfolded without a hitch. Just as he'd done the day before, Charles led Kevin down to a secluded clearing in the woods under the pretense of a sexual encounter. When they reached the agreed-upon location, Kenny, who'd been hiding in the bushes, shot the unsuspecting victim clean in the head. Kevin hit the ground with a thud, but it would take more than a single bullet to kill the 6-foot-tall man. Kenny shot again. This time, the body lay still. Beyond this point, the boys hadn't fleshed out their plan fully, and a wild panic set in. They hastily disposed of the body in a nearby creek and watched as their murder victim sunk down, fully submerged by the muddy water. At the time, Charles had convinced himself he was killing Kevin for a good reason, to stop a sexual predator and protect the kids from harm. But as soon as the bullet struck Kevin, Charles remembers the flood of regret that instantly washed over him. He realizes that nothing could justify taking a man's life. After the crime, to maintain a sense of normalcy, Charles and Kenny followed through with their weekend plans without interruption, visiting a lake with their family. But beneath those masks, both teens were acutely aware of the horror they'd done and anxiously waited for the moment Kevin's absence would be noticed. After the break, we hear how the news of Kevin's disappearance first reached Charles.
Now, here's the crazy thing is, even in like the early 90s, people know that there's these television shows where all these people just get caught so easily. Did you not see these like true crime shows where people just do things and like later on they end up getting busted? It's like they never get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, Kenny and I were in debate in high school, and our entire freshman year we debated prison overcrowding, so we were well versed on the subject.
So how long did y'all last after that? Did y'all hear on the news, or did the cops come get you?
When we came back to town, we stopped by a woman that Kenny knew, her house, and when we did, she said something about the cops were there looking for us, so we panicked.
So they had already found him that quick?
We were gone for the weekend, so we came back on like Sunday evening, and
somebody had already found him in a couple days?
No, they didn't. They actually didn't find him. The floods of '93 started then.
Oh.
And they didn't find him then, but his sister had reported him missing.
Oh, I gotcha.
We left his car like a few miles away in front of a shopping center or something.
Did y'all go, after you killed him, did you go back to his place and take everything?
Yeah, we packed up all his stuff, took the money from his car, loaded all the stuff in his car. We forgot his dog, left it there at his sister's place, which was the big tip that something was wrong, because he would have never left without that dog.
Right. So the cops actually wanted to talk to you guys?
We thought. We weren't sure. We fled as soon as we heard that. We took off and drove out to Colorado, and we were camping out, hiding out in the mountains.
Wow.
To figure out what to do.
Were you just basically like just living on in the rough out there?
Yeah.
And how long did you stay in the mountains?
Just a couple of weeks before we ended up getting chased by the police through the mountains for a while.
They were after you because you were a fugitive?
I'm not even sure at first if they were or they weren't, but we met some teenagers in Colorado, and I believe Kenny had mentioned to one of them that we were wanted from Missouri, and one of them got picked up for something, and so immediately told the cops, hey, those guys are...
Yeah.
And that's when
So did you end up getting caught in Colorado, or did you flee Colorado?
Yeah, we were caught in Colorado.
How were you caught?
We ended up fleeing through the mountains from the area of Canyon City and running all over, and then Kenny and I got split up in the mountains. He got caught like a day or so before I did, and then I got caught like a day after, back at what I thought was the campsite where I could go find him when we got split up. But by then, he had already been caught, and the cops were already waiting for me at the campsite.
Whenever they took you into custody, did you stay a while in Colorado and then they transported you back to Missouri?
Yeah, I was in Colorado about a month or so, I think, and then they brought me back to Missouri.
Did you see Kenny in Colorado jail?
No, he was in a different county. I made it the whole county away from where
Gotcha.
we were in a different county.
So you get transported back and you get questioned by the police in Colorado or Missouri?
Yeah, we got questioned by the police in Colorado. Kenny got caught the day before I did. They immediately flew out to see him.
Did Kenny fold on him? Fold on everything?
Oh, yeah. He told him everything that his aspect of it, everything that he knew.
What did you do?
First thing I told him was I want a lawyer, which they probably didn't even pay any attention to that because what police do. Then they came in an hour or so later and laid down Kenny's statement and let me read it. And after they let me read Kenny's statement, I basically made the same statement.
Yeah, you just went ahead and told them. So now you're faced with probably saying, hey, you're an adult. We could give you the death penalty because you planned this all out. And they probably scared you with the death penalty to make you take the plea, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. They immediately sought the death. We confessed to murder.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, I was almost relieved that Kenny knew nothing about my sexuality. That was nowhere in his statement. So I immediately said everything that Kenny said. Yes, we went out there. I told Kevin to find a Jeep, all of that, to keep that out. And I was happy with that.
Right. That was important for you to keep that secret.
Right.
Yeah.
In 1993, on the edge of the suburbs, and
yeah,
part of my school was in farms and all of that, where I grew up with a bunch of cowboy kids.
True.
That was a thing that I couldn't possibly fathom letting out.
Sure.
For nearly 2 weeks after Kevin's murder, Charles and Kenny lived as fugitives on the run. The boys had made a break for Colorado, hoping to vanish into the empty plains and rugged mountains of the southern Rockies. By that point, Kevin's disappearance had been reported, and once the abandoned truck was located, police suspected foul play. As luck would have it, the worst of the Great Flood of '93 struck Missouri that July. After a spell of heavy rainfall, the riverbanks broke, water levels surged, and Kevin's body was buried beneath volumes of water. Because of this flooding, Kevin's body was only recovered on July 11th, 9 days after his death, at which point the missing persons case finally became a homicide investigation. By that time, Charles and Kenny were long gone, hiding out at a remote camp near Clear Creek Reservoir. For as long as they stuck to the wilderness, the teens stayed under the radar of law enforcement. But it was an encounter with a group of teenagers in Cannon City that led to their undoing. Local police cottoned on to the two itinerant boys and matched their license plate to the homicide investigation taking place in Kansas City. Across Colorado, investigators hunted down the murder suspects. They picked up Kenny on a road just west of Cannon City. A day later, they staked out the Clear Creek campout and ambushed Charles. This put an end to the boys' desperate cross-country flight, and both confessed, surrendering any attempt of covering up their crime. However, Charles was determined to cover up Kevin's sexual advances towards him. Back in the 90s, homophobia was rife, and Charles was terrified that any questions about his own sexuality might come to public light. All these years on, Charles has come to accept the sexual orientation he once struggled with, but at the time, he was fiercely resistant to confess to having a relationship with another man, even more than he was to confess to murder and to spend his life in prison. On the next episode of Voices of a Killer, Kevin talks us through his long incarceration and the lessons he's learned along the way. If you want to find out what happens next, right now, you can sign up at patreon.com/voicesofakiller. There you can find bonus content, early access, ad-free listening, and access to our chat community. So go to patreon.com/voicesofakiller to sign up now. Your support is what keeps us passionate about bringing these stories to you. That's a wrap on this episode of Voices of a Killer. A big shout out to Sonic Futures who handled the production, audio editing, music licensing, and promotion of this podcast. If you want to hear more episodes like this one, make sure to visit our website at voicesofakiller.com. There you can find previous episodes, transcripts, and additional information about the podcast. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Your feedback helps us improve and reach new listeners. Thank you for your support, and we can't wait to share more stories with you in the future. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Toby, and we'll see you next time on Voices of a Killer.